Welcome back to Storytime with Scott Boss. This week we're continuing the Graveyard Gazette. The plot is getting thick. Lots of little clues are coming up. Hopefully you're finding them. This is chapter 15. Carrie woke at 2 and knew he was done sleeping. He decided if a woman was going to come over and cook for him, he could at least clean up the dishes. Something about not doing that had pissed off Laura to no end many times. Maybe he'd learned from that. He wasn't ready to admit that he had just yet, though. He floated around the kitchen, even caught himself humming a tune. Was this a date, he thought? It just might be. He should have gotten flowers, but she was coming to his house. Would it be weird to present her with flowers and then have to find a vase of his own to stick them in? Should he buy the kind that came with a vase? Those were more expensive. He remembered Laura coaching him on that. "We have vases, just get the flowers and I'll find a place to put 'em," she'd said. But he was pretty sure she'd taken them all with her when she left. His phone rang and he saw his parents' number on the screen. He really didn't feel like talking to them, but figured if he didn't pick up now, they might call back when Angela was there. "Hello?" "Carrie," said his mom. "Have you talked to your sister?" She sounded breathless. "A couple days ago. What's up?" "We can't get a hold of her. We even went as far as to call her company, but they wouldn't tell us anything." His head tilted in thought. Margie was known to disappear for a few days at a time. It was kind of her thing, but that never put her mom at ease to hear it. "Do you want me to try her? I mean, she's probably off in some country without a signal." "Carrie, this is your dad." Carrie heard a rustling of the receiver and the familiar gruffness of his dad's voice. "One of their planes went down. Airstar, the company that she works for. It was over in Egypt." Carrie's heart froze. Egypt? When did it go down? "Yesterday. We were watching the news and saw the story. They haven't released any names, but your mom and I can't help but worry when she doesn't answer her phone." "I'm with you," said Carrie. "Let me see what I can find out. I'll call you as soon as I know something." Carrie hung up and pulled up Instagram. Margie was all about posting her latest adventures on her profile, unlike Carrie's profile, which hadn't seen a new picture in months. It took him a minute to remember what she called herself. Air, B, and Babe. Clever. The most recent picture was of her and Juan, in front of the Sphinx. He'd already heard details of this adventure, and it was posted the day they saw it. He sent her a direct message, then paced his kitchen waiting for a reply. It was more likely that she'd have internet access than the phone service. He could hope. But with each passing minute he grew more concerned. After a half hour, he headed back to Instagram and back to that picture. He should have thought of it earlier. John was tagged in her picture. He clicked on his profile and sent him a direct message and friend request while he was at it. "Hey, this is Carrie, Margie's brother. We haven't heard from her in a few days and we're hoping just to know she's okay. Thanks." He signed with his phone number. Carrie went back to pacing his kitchen. His heart raced in his chest. What if something had happened? More than just the flight. After the incident at the hotel, maybe somebody really took offense to that. Maybe. His phone started buzzing in his hand. Before the first ring could sound, he answered it. "Hello? KK, what's up?" Relief washed over him, even to hear that stupid nickname. "You okay? We haven't been able to get a hold of you." "We?" "Mom and Dad. They saw a story about one of your planes going down and, well, you know them." "Oh yeah, they heard about that? That's terrible. It's a crazy story, really. I was supposed to be on that plane, but John got me moved to his flight. We're heading to Lebanon next. Can you believe it?" Carrie's eyes widened. "The flight that crashed? You were supposed to be on it?" "Yes, but I wasn't." "Okay, well, I'm glad to hear you're okay. Can you call Mom, please?" "I will, but can you text me your number? I'm on John's phone. Mine has been acting up, so I just shut it off." "Will do." They hung up and Carrie texted his parents' number to John's phone. When he put down his phone down, he wished Margie still lived in town. She hadn't for years, but if any bad thing was coming to her, he might be able to see it in the paper and be able to stop it, like Michelle and her friend, or lover, or whatever was happening that night. When Angela arrived at his house, they took his car to the grocery store. It was oddly comforting sharing a shopping cart with someone again, going up and down the aisles, pointing out weird products like pickled flavored chips or pumpkin spice gum. It was something he'd really missed, subconsciously at least. It may even be part of why he avoided the grocery store altogether. Carrie did have some stage fright about what items he was picking out. What would she think about his love for corn nuts and cinnamon toast crunch? He threw in a bag of apples to offset the other stuff. But the frozen food section was where it really went off the rails. First it was the frozen pizza, then the hungry man's dinner, then TGI Friday's boneless buffalo wings. Angela didn't say anything, though, just made sure it stayed on his side of the cart so she could pay for her dinner items separately. Do you like wine? She said on the last aisle before the registers. More red than white, he said. She frowned, holding up a bottle of Chardonnay. With Alfredo? No, said Carrie. White's fine. I've had worse. She was smiling again, carrying the bottle towards checkout. The teenage kid at the register 7 rang up Angela's items, carded her, and directed her to stick her credit card in the machine. Then it buzzed, and the kid didn't look up. Card declined, she said. Got another one? Well, no, this one should work. Angela rifled through her purse with no real plan to produce a different card. Can I try it again? You can, but it's still going to decline. Angela stuck it in anyway and sighed as she heard it buzz. I don't. It's supposed to have. Just put it with mine, said Carrie. I'm eating too, no worries. Are you sure? Of course. I was going to cook for you. You still can. Carrie turned to the cashier. Can you just add it to mine? Not anymore, said Miss Deadpan. Gonna have to be separate transactions now. That's fine. Carrie pulled out his card and ran it for the first transaction, then the second, and soon they were out the door with a cart full of food. I'm gonna have to call the bank, Angela said, but first, let's eat. I'm gonna make you help cook, you know. Carrie smirked. You'll regret that. When they arrived at the house, she commended him on his clean kitchen, and he took a bow, handing her a spatula as he did. Madam, what's this? The spatula, said Carrie. It's the only one that isn't melted or broken. Use it wisely. Oh, goodness. Do you have a sharp knife? I have one of those as well. Keyword one. Angela mixed some cream and butter in a saucepan and had Carrie shave the Parmesan while she prepared the chicken. Soon they were sitting down to chicken Alfredo, asparagus, and a bottle of wine that she'd suggested. It was the best home-cooked meal Carrie ate in a year. He found himself moaning during the first few bites as she smiled through her own mouthful. Carrie was on his second plate as she topped off their glasses, the bottle now empty. Where do you see this ending? She asked. Carrie froze mid-chew. This? He thought. What? Reading the look on her face, she clarified. With the paper, you know. How far can we go? How many lives can we save? Carrie shrugged. I honestly thought it would decide. It? Like the paper? I guess. Like the day you took the paper. For a second I thought maybe it was just done. The subscription to the Graveyard Gazette had run out. Graveyard Gazette, huh? I've been calling it the Daily Dead. They both laughed and she raised her glass. To our subscription, may it be paid through the new year, or something like that. Carrie met hers with a clink. Hear, hear. They finished their meal and the wine and then began clearing the table. Do you have any Tupperware? Angela called from the kitchen. I don't want to go through all your cupboards, but we've got to save this so you'll have one more meal that isn't frozen pizza. Carrie walked in with their plates, dumping them in the sink. You forgot the microwavable dinners. There are peas in those, you know. Are they better than the meal that we just had? Carrie shook his head. No way, I'd eat that 3 times a week if I had to. Only 3, she said with a smile. Maybe 4, who knows? Well, I'll cook it for you again sometime if you like. I'd like that. Hold on. He bent down and produced an old Cool Whip container from the cupboard next to the sink. This work? She took it and filled it with the leftovers, tucking it in the fridge. Then she headed to the sink. Where do you keep the sponge? Oh, no, you don't have to do that. Carrie joined her at the sink. I can take care of those. It's no problem. I made the mess. I'm not going to leave your kitchen messy when you had it so clean. Please, he leaned over her to make sure she didn't have a sponge anywhere to use. I'll do them later. She gave him a playful shove in the chest. You really not going to let me do your dishes? No, ma'am, he saluted her. Your duty is done here. Are you kicking me out? Carrie held up his hands. Just out of the kitchen, not the house. Unless you need to go get ready for your thing. No, her head lowered slightly. I've got time. Good. He stood at an arm's length. rocking back and forth on his feet. A silence fell over the kitchen. They could hear a clock ticking in the living room. "It's okay, you know." She still wouldn't meet his eyes. "If you wanted to kiss me." "You'd be okay with that?" She just nodded. He stepped closer, leaving just a few inches between them. She looked into his face. He put his arms up to grab her shoulders and pull her in, then thought better of it and dropped them, meeting her lips with his. She accepted the kiss but didn't give much back. Carrie pulled back, waiting, examining her for a sign of anything. Then she grabbed his arms around the biceps and kissed him back, with feeling this time. When she pulled away, she was smiling at him again. "I liked that," she said. "Me too. It wasn't too weird or anything, right?" "No. I think as long as I feel I'm still in charge, I'll be okay." "Okay." Carrie didn't know what else to say, but soon she took his hand and led him back to the dining room. She pulled a chair away from the table and motioned to it. "Will you sit?" "Sure." Carrie sat awkwardly in the chair. She pushed back his shoulders so she could see his face better, then began kissing him again. His arms instinctively went to her back, and she shoved them back to his sides. Carrie gripped the side of the chair as she moved back and forth in front of him, kissing and holding his face in her hands. He felt like a child that had been told not to move a muscle and was twitching with rebellion. He'd be more comfortable on the couch, but knew her aversion to couches. He kept his hands where they were. She went on for a minute before grabbing his wrists and sliding them to the back of the chair, confirming he was still holding on, then climbed in his lap, straddling him as she went to work at his neck. Carrie was moaning again for something much better than food this time. His hands went down his chest, then his sides, sliding to his pant line and back up. Carrie wasn't sure, but this seemed like a form of Kama Sutra or bondage or something. Whatever it was, he was all for it. She slid off his body and back to her feet. He feared the experience was over, that she would spooked back into her shell by something that reminded her of her stepdad. "Is this okay?" she asked, breathing heavily. He nodded. "Yes, very okay." "Okay, I just didn't want to smother you or something." "No, not at all. Are you okay?" "Yes," she nodded as if telling herself as much as him. "Good." Carrie hoped he wouldn't have to ask her to continue. Thankfully, after a few seconds, she slid back onto his lap, this time grinding her hips up his thighs until she couldn't go any further, then rocking into him. He knew she had to feel what was happening in his pants, but he was the one in the chair. If she didn't like it, she could get off. Only she went on, grabbing his hands and guiding them along her body. She was moaning directly in his ear. He felt like it was on fire, between friction and desire. She kept on him, bringing his hands to her ass, then making him pull her tight against him. Carrie was afraid he couldn't keep going at the rate they were at when she put his hands back on the sides of the chair, sliding off him. "Will you take your pants off for me?" she asked. He didn't bother to answer, just went at his button and stood up and slid them off his ankles. His underwear was stretched tight. "Now sit back, please." He did and put his hands back on the chair. Angela went at her button and dropped her pants to the floor as well. She had black cotton panties on that Carrie barely caught a glimpse of before she was back on top of him, grinding until only a couple pieces of thin fabric were preventing penetration. She felt so good and so warm. The warmth was what he had missed the most in the past year, the closeness of another body on his. She paused for a second when he felt like he couldn't take any more, lining up better than pushing into him again and again, harder each time. Carrie let out an inadvertent moan as he climaxed. Angela moved his hands to her butt again, and he helped with a few more thrusts before she stopped him, breathing hard as she tucked her head into the crook of his neck. She slid back to mid-thigh as his hands were gently stroking her back. Angela ran a hand through Carrie's hair for a minute before she leaned back, kissed him on the forehead, and carefully climbed off. She scooped up her jeans. "Do you mind if I—" She pointed towards the bathroom. "Only be a minute." "Go ahead, I'll wait here." Carrie spent a few minutes in the chair, waiting for her to come out so he could clean himself up and looking around, contemplating what the hell had just happened. His mind was clearing from the jittery fog of his orgasm, and he wondered how this would complicate things going forward. Would they become a couple? Would she even want that, or was she just using him the way she had been used so many times? Was that all she knew when it came to love-making? She came out of the bathroom and he went in. Within a few minutes he was back out and she had her coat on, lingering in the living room. You don't have to run out. He approached her, feeling a tinge of fear, but he knew there was no cuddling after sex with this woman, at least not yet, not where she was coming from. I know, she gave a reassuring smile, but I gotta go home and change clothes, take a shower before I meet up with Michelle. Okay, Carrie smiled and took her hand in his. Thank you for dinner and other things. He kissed it and let it go. You too. She turned and was out the door before he could even offer to walk her to her car. He stood at the window watching her headlights disappear and wished her well on the next part of her night. Chapter 16. Michelle and Angela sat, parked in the vacant lot down Blue Forest Drive, the street Janet and Rick lived on. There was a sign just out their window in the overgrown grass with a squatting dog and a red line going through it, followed by "No trespassing, private property." It was just before 11, and Angela's Honda struggled to keep the cold out as they watched ahead for Rick to leave. Michelle feared he had a career change since she last saw him, but Angela held up the paper, reminding her that the article said Rick was at work when Sophie woke up and went for the gun. He had to be leaving soon. Finally, they saw the garage door moving. Rick's truck pulled out in a hurry and went down the block, out of the neighborhood. Are we driving or walking? Asked Angela. Walking. Michelle looked around. Nobody's noticed us so far. Let's keep it that way. They got out and moved fast like nighttime power walkers. Being two women, they hoped they had a better chance of not looking suspicious. Then they hit the driveway of the two-story house. They noticed all the lights were out. Janet must have gone to bed, and Rick managed to leave without waking her. At least that's what they were banking on. Michelle reached the front stoop, then bent down and searched around a bush until she came up with a ceramic gnome. He had a red hat and bouquet of yellow flowers to go with his toothy smile. Michelle turned him over and crammed her hand up his rear. Soon she came out with a box, slid it open, and produced a key. Nice, said Angela. As long as they haven't changed the locks. Michelle put the key on the door as quietly as she could. Or gotten an alarm system. She winced and turned the key. It made a popping sound as the deadbolt came free from the door frame. She listened for a second, then gave a thumbs up and handed the key back to Angela. If I can do this quietly, we'll lock it back up and they'll never know. She disappeared into the house. The plan was for her to sneak into the bedroom and find the gun and remove the bullets. If Janet found Sophie clicking an empty gun at her later, she'd probably think twice about having it available at all. She'd scold Rick with a legitimate argument. What if there had been bullets in it? If things didn't go that smooth, she could at least stop Sophie from getting the gun in the first place, and maybe still escape before they knew it was her. She banked on the 5-year-old not remembering her from a year ago, and not being able to describe her to her mother. If Janet woke up, well, then there would be some explaining to do. Michelle tiptoed through the kitchen while Angela quietly closed the door behind them, waiting in the entryway as planned. The bedrooms were on the second floor, and thankfully the stairs were carpeted. Angela watched the stairway to her left, where it darkened completely at the top. Michelle crept up, one slow footstep at a time. There was minimal creaking, and soon she gave one last thumbs up and disappeared into the darkness. Michelle went down the hall. The layout came back to her with no problem. The first door on the left was a bathroom, then Sophie's room. On the right, a linen closet and a guest bedroom that was mostly a junk room when Michelle was last there. It was the place they'd been caught, when they thought Rick was downstairs entertaining guests and all the kids were playing outside. Rick had come up to use the bathroom in the master bedroom and heard a noise. Checking to make sure it wasn't some 4-year-old friend of Sophie's messing around, he walked in on them. Michelle shook the memory out of her head. At the end of the hall was Janet and Rick's room. Michelle paused at Sophie's door. She could check on her, wake her up and tell her it was okay and never to touch guns, then go back to sleep. But Sophie might scream to find a woman who was mostly a stranger to her in her room. She continued to Janet's door. It was a crack open, maybe from Rick saying goodnight before he left. Maybe so she could hear Sophie if she called. Either way, it was easy for Michelle to slip in without making a sound. Janet's soft snores could be heard from the doorway. Michelle inched closer to the bed, staying on Rick's side, the left, and watching her as she approached. She stopped at the nightstand, taking a half-second to fly through the memories of her time with the sleeping woman. It was an affair, no doubt in Michelle's mind, but it was fun and exciting and something Rick couldn't provide. She understood Janet better than he did, and even in the short time, she respected her from seeing her do her work. Rick didn't. He wasn't even sure social work should be considered work, but he only said that when he was drunk, according to Janet, which, in her mind, meant he really didn't mean it, whereas Michelle thought it was the truth finally coming out. Sometimes when you're the one helping people with their own shitty situations and relationships, you can't see the issues with the one you have at home. Michelle leaned in, not touching the bed but getting close enough to smell her, and another wave of old feelings washed over her. She leaned back, pursing her lips, and reached for the top drawer of Rick's nightstand. Her hand froze when she heard a turning of a door handle from down the hallway. If she was quick, she could still get the gun, get the bullets out, and maybe sneak past Sophie, hide behind the door or something. She slid the drawer open, making more noise than she meant to, but aside from a Bible and some coins, the drawer was empty. She looked back at the doorway and didn't see any movement. She tried the second drawer and still had no luck. Surely Sophie hadn't already gotten a hold of the gun. He must have moved it, maybe to Janet's side. Michelle scooted around the bed at the last second. She saw a shadow in the doorway and she ducked down onto the floor, peering over the mound of Janet's body and the blankets. Sophie stood in the doorway, a 5-year-old red-headed girl wearing Little Mermaid pajamas. Her eyes were not sleepy but alert. Her 2 little hands with chipped cherry-red nail polish wrapped around a revolver the size of her face, pointing it straight ahead of her, searching the room. Michelle could barely believe she was able to lift the thing, much less fire it. She considered calling out to her and telling her she was okay. It was just a friend's in the room and that she saw Sophie. But then she saw Sophie's shadow on the wall and felt shivers cover her entire body. The shadow was tall, going straight to the top of the 10-foot ceilings, broad-shouldered like a man in a business suit. But worst of all, it had eyes. Shadows weren't supposed to have eyes. But there they were, 2 holes in the dark, glowing, searching the room like the small child below. When both sets locked on Michelle, she screamed, like you do when you're coming out of a nightmare, unable to control your voice. Janet jolted up in the bed. "What, Rick? Sophie?" She turned to see Michelle next to her, hiding at the side of her bed. "Michelle?" She pushed herself up against the headboard, gripping the sheets against her chest. "What are you doing?" Michelle pointed at Sophie, but truly at the shadow behind her. Janet followed her gaze just in time to see her daughter pull the trigger. The first bullet took her in the shoulder, throwing her against the headboard. She screamed in pain as another round went right past her head, spraying wood splinters everywhere. Michelle ducked her head but reached an arm up and latched onto Janet's left hand, yanking her towards the floor. Another round went off and Michelle felt her elbow explode with pain. She pulled back, landing on the floor, holding her bleeding elbow and whimpering. Janet was crying from the bed. "Please, honey, it's Mommy, stop shooting, put it down." But 2 more rounds went off and the pleading stopped. Michelle didn't dare look up, afraid her head would be next. Then she heard Angela in the hall. "Don't shoot," she called. Michelle peeked her head over the edge of the bed, just enough to see Angela enter the doorway with what appeared to be a metal baking pan. She held it up, bracing for the gun to go off as Sophie pointed it at her. Then Michelle saw eyes on the shadow. Again, the shape of them had changed to accompany the smile that opened up on it as well, in the middle of the black face on the wall. There was a black hand waving down at her, a giant shadow hand. Then it dropped out of sight. Michelle looked back to Sophie just in time to see her turn the gun around, point it directly at her own face, and pull the trigger. The last shot was deafening. Her little body hit the floor and the room fell silent. Michelle was fading in and out of consciousness as she felt the car stop. Angela jumped out and ran around to her door. She leaned across to unlatch the seatbelt and helped her out. They were at the entry to an ER Michelle didn't recognize, and Angela was leading her in, wearing only a t-shirt and no coat. Michelle realized her arm was wrapped in Angela's coat as they stepped up to the counter. The nurses heard gunshot and immediately rushed them back. Angela waited in the lobby while they cleaned and wrapped her elbow. When she was stable, they let Angela back in. A nurse was leaving the room as she entered. "How is it?" Angela asked, seeing the large bandage. "Having surgery in a couple hours, then we'll see." "I don't know where to start." Shit was fucked, Michelle shook her head. So fucked. I can't believe that little girl. It wasn't her. Michelle's lips were tight. Angela's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? There was something else there. Another person? Then she whispered, Did Janet have a gun? No. Michelle shook her head, staring at a blank spot in the room. There was a shadow on the wall. It smiled at me, like it knew I was there and what I was there for, and it wasn't going to give me the satisfaction. A shadow? Michelle nodded. Clear as day. Clear as these papers we've been reading. Wait, what are you getting at? The shadow made her do it? Maybe. I don't know. I just know I'm done with this. This whole superhero game we're playing, it ain't me. Hell, it ain't you. It ain't any of us. We should have stopped while we were ahead. Angela checked the door behind her to see a nurse hurrying by to another room. Then she turned back. When we were ahead? When we saved those kids? I think so. And now we've gone and tempted fate. Her eyes were wide and vacant as she leaned back on her pillow. After seeing those two, the way I'm done. Angela put a hand on her good arm. We'll talk about it when Carrie and them get here. Michelle waved dismissively. Nothing left to say. Angela chewed at her lips, turning over the meaning of it all. I will say, though, continued Michelle, quick thinking back there. Angela nodded. I knew if you were at the scene, given your history with them. It would be back to prison with my ass, said Michelle, forever. But all of this? Wrapping my arm so I didn't leave a trail of blood down their hall? Locking the door, putting the key back, hell, taking me out to Somerville Hospital instead of Davy? Good thinking, all around. Half of me wonders if you've done this before. If you have, don't tell me. I know enough shit for one lifetime. Two nurses walked in. One of them said, We're going to move you over to the OR to get you prepped. Are you okay to move? Ready as I'll ever be, said Michelle. There's a waiting area for family and friends, the nurse said to Angela. Head back to the desk, down the hall, and follow signs for surgery. Thank you. Angela gave Michelle a pat on the leg before exiting the room. Carrie, Johnny, and Bruce arrived in time to see her off before surgery. She gave them her blessing to take off, assuring them that she would be passed out when they got her out of surgery and into a bed. She promised to let them know when they could come visit. They found themselves at Denny's at 3 a.m., Angela retelling the story from both their perspectives. A fucking shadow monster? Said Johnny. Are you shitting me? Angela shook her head. No, she really saw it, or thinks she did. Did you see it? Asked Bruce. No, but I believe something was off about that little girl. The way she fired that gun, without just falling over, and her accuracy was incredible given the circumstances. And how'd you two survive? Asked Johnny. Angela put her hands flat on the table. Honestly, I think she knew she was out of bullets, like she'd saved the last one for herself. No fucking way, Johnny rolled the pepper shaker between his hands. 5-year-old was counting shots? Maybe not a 5-year-old, but something was. I heard 5 shots by the time I got in the room. She used the 6th on herself, deliberately. It wasn't a slip-up of a child. It was clear as she was turning it around to use it on herself. Michelle saw it too. Damn, Johnny set the shaker down without flipping it, his head moving side to side slowly. Maybe it was something, said Bruce, but what does that mean? Good question. Carrie took a shaky sip of coffee. I just wish we would have been there to back you guys up. If anything, said Angela, it was good you weren't. Just more of a chance one of you would have gotten shot too. Johnny whispered, So the police don't know nothing? Angela shook her head. I made sure we didn't leave a trail of blood or any signs of entry. I mean, they could find some of Michelle's blood somewhere, but I don't think they'd have any reason to look. The girl died with the gun in her hands. Only her prints on it, and maybe her dad's. Bruce stretched out his neck, taking a casual look around the restaurant to make sure they were alone. What about the neighbors? They were at the end of a cul-de-sac with a vacant lot between them and the next neighbors. I didn't see any lights on until further down the street. So what now? Asked Carrie. What do we do with the paper? There was no reply. Everyone was at a loss. Only a day ago they were celebrities, saviors of a youth group. Now they'd almost lost one of their own, and a little girl killed not just her mom, as the paper mentioned, but herself as well. "Y'all ready to order?" said their waitress, a big black woman with long braids and purple beads on the end. "I think we need a minute," said Carrie. They watched her walk away with her order pad, huffing as she went. "We could try the building," said Angela. "The building?" asked Johnny. Angela pushed aside her coffee, knowing it would make her nerves worse. "Inside the gates. I saw someone in there the other morning." "You still think there's a person in there?" asked Bruce. "Yes, maybe. I don't know." "Place is always locked up," said Johnny. "Anyone got a bolt cutters?" "I do." Bruce put a hand up, then lowered it slowly. "But are we really breaking in there?" Carrie and Angela nodded. "Right now?" Bruce tapped on the menu. "I haven't even ordered breakfast yet." "Breakfast can wait." Carrie threw a $10 bill on the table for their coffees. "Let's go." They were standing up, putting on their coats when the waitress came back. "Didn't see nothing you liked?" she asked, collecting their menus and the cash. "Something came up," said Carrie. "Sorry." "Don't hurt me." She tucked the 10 into her apron. "I'm just going to pretend y'all was never here at all." And that's the end for this week. Come back next week for Chapter 17.